It's an interesting thing. We live in a culture where narcissism is often celebrated, disguised as confidence, rebranded as self-expression, even sold as empowerment. But underneath that glossy surface, there's a profound danger. The narcissist constructs their entire life on a fragile scaffolding of deception. Deception towards others, but most tragically, deception towards themselves. And here's the truth: reality doesn't bend indefinitely to your delusions. It eventually pushes back, and when it does, it is merciless. So the question isn't whether the narcissist will succeed in maintaining their illusion forever. No, the question is, where does that road actually lead? What becomes of the individual who sacrifices humility, responsibility, and truth at the altar of vanity and self-importance? History tells us, psychology tells us, and human experience, generation after generation, warns us. The endpoint is not triumph, it is isolation, disintegration, and despair. When we talk about the narcissist, we're really talking about someone who has built an identity that is not rooted in reality, but in illusion. It looks strong on the surface, it sounds confident, it even seems admirable in fleeting moments, but it is fundamentally fragile. You see, the narcissist survives by creating a persona, a mask that they present to the world. That mask is carefully crafted to elicit admiration, to demand attention, and to shield the person from the unbearable weight of genuine self-examination. But here's the problem: a mask is not a face. A persona is not a soul, and when the entire sense of self is built upon something hollow, the structure cannot endure the test of time. The narcissist convinces themselves that they are special, untouchable, uniquely deserving of privilege or recognition. But that conviction is not sustained by truth. It's sustained by fantasy, by constant reinforcement from outside sources, and by denial of inner reality. Sooner or later, cracks begin to form. When someone points out their flaws, when circumstances fail to align with their expectations, or when admiration begins to wane, their entire foundation trembles. Because it was never built on competence, humility, or truth. It was built on sand. And sand cannot bear the weight of a storm. In psychological terms, what we're seeing is a profound lack of integration between who they are and who they pretend to be. The deeper self, the real imperfect human being, is hidden away, repressed, even despised. And the false self, the mask, is forced into the world as though it were genuine. But reality always has a way of tearing down illusions. So the narcissist is condemned to spend their life defending a fragile construct that requires endless maintenance. Every compliment must be chased, every threat to their image must be neutralized, every person who fails to worship them must be discarded or destroyed. Imagine the exhaustion of sustaining such a performance. It is not strength, it is slavery to an illusion, and what's most tragic is this: the narcissist does not merely fool others, they fool themselves. They come to believe that the mask is real. They confuse admiration with love, control with respect, and attention with meaning. But none of those substitutions satisfy the deeper human hunger for authenticity, connection, and purpose. So while they may appear grandiose, while they may impress or intimidate for a while, beneath it all lies a deep and gnawing insecurity. The louder they proclaim their superiority, the more you can sense the fragility of the structure they're defending. That is why, ultimately, the narcissist's identity is doomed to collapse. A life built on illusion cannot stand indefinitely. At some point, reality asserts itself through failed relationships, through professional downfall, through the quiet emptiness that arrives when the audience leaves and the mask slips off. And when that collapse comes, it is not gentle. It is brutal, because the person is left not only with the ruins of their false identity, but also with the painful recognition that they never nurtured the real self that could have sustained them. The narcissist lives on a steady diet of validation, and without it, their entire psychological system begins to unravel. They are addicted, not in a casual or metaphorical sense, but in the same way an alcoholic is addicted to drink or a gambler is addicted to risk. Validation becomes the narcotic that soothes the hollowness within. Every compliment, every glance of admiration, every sign of submission from others operates like a quick hit of dopamine. It provides temporary relief, a fleeting sense of stability, but just like any addiction, the relief never lasts. The moment the praise fades or the audience moves on, the craving returns, stronger, deeper, more insatiable than before. This creates a cycle that is both destructive and endless. The narcissist must constantly engineer situations that place them at the center of attention. They must exaggerate, manipulate, and distort reality to ensure that admiration continues to flow. They cannot afford to be ordinary. They cannot afford to be ignored, and so they sacrifice truth, humility, and even their relationships at the altar of validation. Friends, partners, and colleagues are not seen as equals, but as instruments. Their worth is calculated in terms of how well they provide the necessary fuel. If you praise them, you are valuable. If you criticize or fail to acknowledge them, you become irrelevant, or worse, an enemy. The need for control grows out of this dependency, because if your identity is built on what others think of you, then you must exert tremendous effort to shape those perceptions. That's why narcissists micromanage conversations, rewrite narratives, and attempt to dominate the people around them. It isn't just arrogance, it's survival. They cannot risk losing control because loss of control means the validation might stop. And if the validation stops, they are forced to confront the emptiness they've been running from. That is the terror they cannot face. But control is never absolute, and reality is too complex to manipulate indefinitely. The narcissist inevitably finds that people resist, situations shift, and admiration dries up. What follows is panic. They lash out, they blame others, they twist the truth beyond recognition, all in a desperate attempt to keep the illusion alive. Yet, the harder they cling to control, the more obvious their fragility becomes. People begin to see the cracks. The charm turns into manipulation, the confidence into tyranny, and the so-called strength into desperation. This addiction to validation and control is what traps the narcissist in a prison of their own making. They cannot live without praise, but they also cannot experience the authenticity that makes praise meaningful. They cannot stop controlling others, but in doing so, they destroy the very relationships that could have given them genuine support. And so the cycle continues, craving, manipulation, collapse, and then craving again. It is a downward spiral that accelerates over time. In the end, what masquerades as power is revealed to be dependence. What looks like confidence is exposed as desperation. The narcissist doesn't control the validation controls them. And that is why their path is unsustainable, because no human being can survive indefinitely while chained to the impossible task of filling an inner void with the fleeting approval of others. ChatGPT said, when you examine the trajectory of a narcissist's life, one of the clearest patterns you see is the steady erosion of genuine relationships. And this happens for a very simple reason. Real relationships require reciprocity. They demand honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to recognize the humanity of the other person. But the narcissist cannot truly give any of these things because to them, relationships are not about connection. They are about extraction. Other people are treated as mirrors, not as individuals. They exist to reflect back admiration, to provide affirmation, and to feed the inflated self-image that the narcissist is so desperate to maintain. At first, this often works. The narcissist can be magnetic, charming, and captivating. They know how to perform, how to present themselves as larger than life, how to draw people in. They may even convince others that their self-centeredness is confidence, their arrogance is leadership, or their manipulation is charisma. But these qualities do not hold up under the weight of time. Eventually, the performance begins to falter. Those who are close to the narcissist start to notice the absence of real empathy, the lack of genuine concern, the way every interaction bends back toward the narcissist's own needs and desires. And with that realization comes disappointment, resentment, and ultimately distance. The narcissist, however, does not interpret this as the natural consequence of their own behavior. They see it as betrayal. They cannot tolerate the idea that someone might withdraw because of their selfishness, so instead, they frame the other person as disloyal, ungrateful, or even malicious. This sets up a cycle of relationship decay. People draw close, the narcissist exploits them, the exploitation is revealed and the relationship breaks down. Over time, this pattern repeats until fewer and fewer people remain willing to engage. This erosion is not confined to romantic relationships. It spreads into friendships, family ties, and professional connections. Colleagues grow tired of the credit grabbing. Partners become weary of the lack of intimacy. Friends disengage when they realize they are valued only for what they can provide. Slowly, the narcissist burns bridge after bridge. And while they may blame others outwardly, deep down they are left with the gnawing recognition that people are slipping away. The great irony is that the narcissist needs relationships more than most. Their entire identity depends on constant external reinforcement, yet their very behavior ensures that the reinforcement is unstable and temporary. What they long for, unwavering admiration, endless loyalty, unconditional support, cannot be sustained because it is not grounded in reality. Real relationships thrive on mutual respect and trust, qualities that the narcissist erodes the moment they prioritize their own ego above all else. And so, the narcissist finds themselves in a progressively shrinking world. Where once they were surrounded by admirers, they now encounter distance, skepticism, and eventually avoidance. The people who remain are often those too entangled, too intimidated, or too dependent to escape. But these connections are hollow, transactional, and poisoned by resentment. The narcissist may still have an audience, but it is no longer one of willing admiration. It is one of reluctant endurance. That is the tragedy. The very thing they need most, authentic human connection, is the very thing their behavior systematically destroys. And as those relationships dissolve, so too does the possibility of redemption, because without others to hold up the mirror, the narcissist is left staring at the emptiness they have spent a lifetime avoiding. Beneath the mask of superiority that the narcissist wears so convincingly lies profound and inescapable isolation. This is one of the great paradoxes of narcissism. The more they elevate themselves above others, the further they distance themselves from genuine human connection. On the surface, it appears as though they are admired, even envied, for their confidence, their assertiveness, or their apparent success, but this external admiration is hollow. It never translates into true closeness. Because for someone to truly know you, you must be willing to show them who you really are, and the narcissist cannot afford that. The real self, fragile and insecure, is hidden behind layers of defense. What they present instead is a carefully curated image, grandiose, flawless, untouchable, and while this image may draw attention, it cannot sustain intimacy. Over time, people begin to sense that something is missing. Conversations feel one-sided, interactions feel transactional, and emotional connection is replaced by performance. Partners grow weary of the constant demands for admiration without reciprocation. Friends begin to feel used rather than valued. Even children of narcissists often recognize at a very young age that their parents' love seems conditional, based on compliance, achievement, or image rather than genuine acceptance. Slowly, people withdraw. They stop confiding, they stop trusting, they stop investing in the relationship, and the narcissist, though outwardly dismissive, feels the void growing deeper. The tragedy is that the narcissist misinterprets this withdrawal. Instead of recognizing that their lack of authenticity drives people away, they double down on the mask. They become even more boastful, more domineering, more insistent that others play along with the illusion. This only accelerates the isolation. The very defense mechanism they use to avoid rejection ensures that rejection becomes inevitable, and so they find themselves in a shrinking circle of relationships, many of them superficial, temporary, or entirely transactional. But isolation does not only mean the absence of others, it means the absence of being truly known. When you hide your real self behind superiority, no one can connect with you because the self you present is not real. The narcissist, therefore, experiences a deep loneliness even when surrounded by people. They may be applauded, but they are not understood. They may be followed, but they are not loved. This creates a kind of existential solitude, a sense of being fundamentally cut off from the world, condemned to live inside a fortress of their own construction. And here is the bitter truth. Superiority is a mask, that costs too much to wear forever. The longer it is maintained, the more it alienates others, until eventually the narcissist is left standing alone, clinging to the illusion of greatness in an empty room. The power, the charm, the control, all of it collapses under the weight of solitude. Because human beings, at the most basic level, are wired for connection. We are not meant to live as gods among mortals. We are meant to live as flawed but authentic individuals in relationship with one another. The narcissist rejects this truth, and in doing so, condemns themselves to the most painful form of isolation, to be surrounded, yet unknown, admired, yet unloved, powerful, yet profoundly alone. Eventually, no matter how elaborate the illusion, reality catches up with the narcissist. They spend years, sometimes decades, constructing a facade of superiority and control, but the world has a way of eroding what is false. You cannot indefinitely manipulate circumstances, people, and appearances without cracks beginning to show. And when those cracks widen, the narcissist faces a collapse that is both inevitable and devastating, because everything they have built, their identity, their relationships, their sense of self-worth, rests on an unstable foundation. And when that foundation gives way, it doesn't crumble slowly, it falls apart all at once. This collapse often comes in moments of crisis. Perhaps a relationship breaks beyond repair, and the partner who once provided constant validation finally leaves. Perhaps a career implodes under the weight of dishonesty, arrogance, or reckless ambition. Or perhaps the narcissist simply grows older, and the admiration they relied upon fades as youth, charm, or influence slip away. Whatever the trigger, the effect is the same. The scaffolding that held up the narcissist's self-image is torn down, and they are left face with a reality they have spent their whole life avoiding. The reason this collapse is so brutal is that the narcissist has no internal reserves of authenticity to fall back on. Most people, when confronted with hardship, can lean on genuine relationships, humility, or a sense of inner worth to weather the storm. But the narcissist has neglected those inner resources. They have invested everything into the mask, into the performance, into the illusion of perfection. When the mask is stripped away, there is nothing left but an underdeveloped, fragile self, a self that has been denied, repressed, and ignored for years, and encountering that neglected reality is profoundly destabilizing. This is why narcissists, when they face collapse, often spiral into despair, rage, or self-destruction. They cannot process failure as a temporary setback, because their entire identity is bound to the illusion of being untouchable. Fail for them is not just to stumble, it is to cease existing in the way they have always defined themselves, and so they may lash out violently at others, desperate to blame someone else for their downfall. Or they may sink into depression, crushed under the weight of the emptiness that finally reveals itself. In some cases, they alternate between rage and despair, unable to reconcile the person they pretended to be with the fragile self they actually are. Yet it is precisely in this collapse that the truth is revealed. The narcissist cannot outrun reality forever. The admiration, the control, the illusion, all of it eventually collapses under the unyielding weight of truth. And when that collapse comes, it exposes not only the hollowness of their constructed identity, but also the cost of a life spent fleeing authenticity. The collapse is not merely external, it is internal, a shattering of the very foundation of the self. And so, while the narcissist believes they can bend reality to their will, they ultimately discover that reality is stronger. Illusion may hold for a time, but truth endures. And when truth arrives, it arrives like a storm, merciless, unforgiving, and utterly inescapable. At the end of the narcissist's journey lies a destination that is both predictable and tragic, emptiness and regret. All along, they have been running from an inner void, trying to fill it with attention, status, and control. For a while, it may seem to work. The applause feels intoxicating, the admiration provides a rush, the illusion of superiority cushions them from their own insecurities. But none of it endures. Attention fades, admiration shifts to someone new, and the world moves on. What remains is the emptiness they were fleeing from in the first place, only now it is deeper, because years have been wasted avoiding authenticity, and the cost of that avoidance can no longer be ignored. The narcissist eventually comes to realize that they have traded what matters most for what never lasts. They pursued praise instead of love, power instead of intimacy, appearances instead of truth. And while these things can provide short-term satisfaction, they cannot sustain the human spirit. Human beings are wired for meaning, for connection, for growth. Strip those away, and all that remains is a hollow shell. The narcissist, who once projected invincibility, is now haunted by the recognition that their life was built on lies. And this recognition does not bring peace, it brings regret. Regret comes in many forms. It may appear as bitterness as the narcissist looks back at broken relationships and blames others for their loneliness. It may appear as despair when they realize that the admiration they once commanded no longer exists and they have nothing substantial to fall back on. Or it may appear quietly in the stillness of solitude when there is no one left to perform for, no audience left to impress, and the silence becomes unbearable. That silence is the sound of a life unlived, the sound of opportunities wasted, of love squandered, of truth ignored. This descent into emptiness is not just external, it is existential. The narcissist is left to face the most terrifying realization of all, that their pursuit of self-glorification has cost them their own humanity. They became so obsessed with appearing great that they forgot how to be real. And when the mask is finally stripped away, they are confronted with a self they never took the time to develop. That undernourished self cannot provide comfort, cannot sustain meaning, cannot withstand the weight of mortality. What is left is a hollow core, echoing with the consequences of a lifetime of avoidance. And here's the most painful part. By the time the narcissist fully confronts this emptiness, it is often too late to repair the damage. Relationships that could have brought healing are long gone. Opportunities for growth have been squandered. The time that could have been used to cultivate humility, compassion, and authenticity has been consumed by vanity and illusion. What remains is the heavy burden of regret, a recognition that life could have been different, richer, more meaningful, had they chosen truth over image, connection over control, humility over pride. This is where the narcissist eventually ends up, not in triumph, not in fulfillment, but in a barren wasteland of their own making. And that ending is a warning for all of us. Because the choice between illusion and authenticity is not reserved for narcissists alone. It is a choice we all face every day. The difference is that most of us still have time to choose wisely.